and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who would like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you. Hi, I'm Helen Leathers, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Tom Dillon. Morning, Tom. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much.
Good.
I'm in a challenging mood.
Okay, that's good, because we're talking about challenging today.
Yeah, well, it's our challenges in coaching day, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And what's the challenge today, Helen?
It's challenging.
Just challenging.
In the coaching room.
A day full of challenge.
Yes.
Well, we'll see how we go with this then.
So, Tom, does challenge belong in the coaching room?
I think it has its place. I think it's all about time and place, getting it right. I don't really see myself as a challenging coach, but there's definitely challenge built into my coaching. But obviously, I'm interested in generating new thinking, and for some people, that is a challenge. Some people have their way of thinking about particular topics and don't really want to change the way they think about it. So sometimes that in itself can be a challenge. But everything I do is about generating new thinking. And if we think about Tom's Code as a model that we introduced in an earlier podcast, we ask people what they want to talk about, and we will ask them what they want as an outcome from the conversation. So already we're challenging them to think about, okay, well, you want to talk about this, but actually what do you want by the end of it? So there's a little bit of a challenge there. And then we ask them how meaningful it is to them to talk about this, why they've brought it, what's the reason for bringing it to the coaching room. Now, sometimes it's fairly obvious because it's a really important topic and it's just apparent from what they're saying that it's really important to them. But we might ask them, what's going to be meaningful in solving this to you? Why is it important? What will you have if you solve this? So there is a little bit of challenge there. But once we've got past that and we're into the conversation, really, I'm going to let them tell their story. So I'm not at that point going to be challenging. So I take a very person-centered approach to the beginning of my coaching conversations. And I want to hear what they think. I want to know what's going on for them. So I will invite them to tell me their story, and they might spend 5 minutes doing that. They might spend half an hour, but at that point, I'm not going to be challenging. I'm just going to be listening. I'm going to be taking it all in.
Mm-hmm. So when do you think that challenge might come into play?
Once they've finished their story. I've heard coaches say, well, you should be interrupting them. If their story's not helpful, just stop it. Tell them this isn't helpful at all. Stop talking about it. I'm not going to do that. I think it's really important, and I think really powerful to hold that space and let someone be listened to. I think it's really affirmative. People can make a lot of sense of what's going on for them just by talking it out and having someone really listen to them. So at that point, I'm present. I'm in the moment, I'm listening, I'm taking it all in. As I say, I'm building up a story for myself, so I will be looking for inconsistencies in their story, things that perhaps don't seem to make an awful lot of sense. Maybe they've got the story slightly skewed, there might be some unconscious biases coming in, there might be some assumptions that they're making, and we might see through all of that in a way that they're not getting. So it's someone objective looking in, and hearing the story and thinking, okay, there's something not quite sitting right. But I'm not going to interrupt and challenge at that point.
Well, once they've told their stories, perhaps we can gently explore some of the inconsistencies or contradictions that they've talked about.
And definitely if there are contradictions, then I might be saying, okay, you mentioned this at the beginning, but then towards the end you said this, and how do those two things fit together? So I'm not going to be saying, well, that can't possibly be true because you've said this and you've said this. That's nonsense.
You've just contradicted yourself.
Yeah. But I will ask them how those two, and quite often people go, well, they don't, do they? And then they will make more sense of what's going on for them. Mm-hmm. So definitely in terms of those contradictions, obviously if there's any cognitive dissonance that's going on for them where they've got two competing ideas and they're trying to work through it, then we'll kind of challenge them around that and what they really want. So we might have someone that wants to give up smoking but is smoking 20. We'll explore that and how do those two things fit together, that they say they want to give up smoking but they continue to behave in the same way.
And assumptions you mentioned, and I think that's quite a common area for people to make assumptions about their current situation.
Yes, and in that storytelling, there will be assumptions. Quite often, there will be assumptions built in that they will say, well, so they're obviously thinking this about me, and they've got no idea what's in someone else's head.
Or even, I can't go down that route. That's not an option for me.
Yeah. So in that sense, maybe not even an assumption, but a self-limiting belief that I couldn't possibly do that because I'm like this. So that's, again, another area that we, as coaches, might want to challenge in someone, is when they show up and they say, well, yeah, but I couldn't do that. That's not me. But I think that's a fair challenge to make. I think that's really helpful to someone to actually ask them what's going on for them, why they feel that they can't do something. Where does that come from?
And what comes to mind here is also then when we move on to the options that someone has, and even someone who thinks they're not a challenging coach, that is an opportunity to be gently challenging, because someone might say, well, all I can think of is A or B. And we know that there's always more than two options in order to move away from where we are or towards where we want to be. So even the act of exploring what other options is a challenge. It's just a gentle challenge. So for perhaps coaches or new coaches who are listening to this, some of the doctors that we work with, if they're thinking, oh, I don't know if I can be challenging, at some point you will be, but in a very gentle way.
Yeah, and I think that asking what other options people have is a way of gently challenging. So people will quite often turn up and say, well, I could do this, I could do this. And obviously when we're training coaches, we have coaches that are practicing, and they might well come to that conversation and say, okay, so you could do this, which one do you think is the right one for you, without going, well, but what else could you do? And we've used this analogy before, but when you come to a crossroads, you could go left, you could go right, but maybe you could stay where you are for a while. Maybe you could go back the way that you've come. It doesn't have to. Maybe you could get in a helicopter, go up. There are different options that people won't have thought of. So actually, just a gentle challenge around options can be useful. And I think also going back to the story that people are telling, people tend to, when they're telling a story about other people, it's interesting, isn't it? Because people are different, and some people will have a very self-deprecating, oh, well, this is my fault. But quite often when it's about other people are involved, they will have built up a defensive story where they paint themselves as maybe the hero in the story or maybe the victim in the story, but very rarely do people see themselves as the villain and that they're doing anything wrong. So they'll have that self-serving bias that, well, this is happening to me and they're doing all this stuff. And so they will tend to see things from their own perspective. And I think sometimes just playing back, holding up the mirror and going, okay, what I'm hearing is this, allows them to see that perhaps it's not quite as... Now, the problem we have as coaches is we only ever hear one side of the story. We have a coachee come to us, they tell us their story. We're never going to get to talk to the other person to find out, where the truth in the middle lies. We only ever hear from the coachee. And I've done enough mediation, that's another role that I take on, where I hear a story from the first person involved, and they tell me this night, oh, yeah, that sounds terrible. Oh, no, that other person sounds all right, and that sounds like a nightmare. And then I go and talk to the other person, and it's a completely different story. And the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Now, we don't have that opportunity as coaches to talk to the other person. So we have to try and make sense of what's going on from what's being said to us. But sometimes that in itself can be, you're going to have to challenge.
And so this understanding from different perspectives is a form of challenge, and it's something I know that you use and I use, and we teach on our transformational coaching diploma, is helping to raise awareness in the coachee through seeing things from different perspectives. So using exercises, techniques in coaching to see how someone else might be feeling about that. So that's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. And sometimes just playing back what they've said can offer that challenge. So I had a guy who was outraged by the way he was being treated by his organisation. And when I played it back to him, I kind of played back the whole scenario that he just explained to me. I said, so it sounds as if your boss just made a mistake. Mm. And he went, yeah. and all of the fight about the organisation and how badly he was being treated just left because he realised in that moment, it was what he'd told me, but I just played back, okay, sounds like she made a mistake. And he went, yeah, you're right. And that was it. So that's one way of challenging, is to play back the story, but also to look for those inconsistencies in the story, and then to perhaps ask them to look at it from a different perspective. So maybe for them to step into the shoes of the person that they are perhaps having a disagreement with, and to look at it through their eyes and see how that might feel to them. I had that recently with someone who, there was another doctor in her organisation that she just didn't see eye to eye with, and felt that this other doctor was in the wrong. And but she was new to the organisation and struggling a little bit and feeling a bit isolated. And I said, how do you think that she's feeling in this situation? She said, well, she's probably feeling quite defensive. She's probably feeling a bit isolated because everyone kind of feels a bit like I do about her. And so as a result of that, she then went and had a conversation with this other doctor, who then suddenly felt included because someone was talking to her about what was going on. And it all, I mean, they didn't become the best of friends, but suddenly there was a much better working relationship because she'd taken the time to look at it from the other person's perspective through the challenge that I'd offered, and then to go and have a conversation. And quite often, those conversations are invaluable.
So we've started off talking about challenging, but it sounds like challenging doesn't have to be in your face challenging. It doesn't have to be confrontational challenging. It can be very gentle, and obviously we'll do it when we have good rapport. We don't want to break rapport, but we don't want to collude with the coachee either in their story.
Yeah, and I've heard that described as a cosy club, where perhaps the coach and the coachee get together and they have a lovely chat. They put the world to rights. The coachee tells their story. The coach goes, "Oh, yeah, it sounds awful," and yeah, you're right to feel like that about it, and nothing really changes. So we don't want them just to come and moan about what's going on and for us to commiserate with them. We want something to change, and hopefully the coachee wants something to change as well. Otherwise, they've got the wrong impression of coaching. And the whole point is that in coming, they think about things differently and perhaps make some changes themselves. So it's definitely not a cosy club where we don't offer any challenge, but I think we want to keep the coachee in that space where they know that we're working with them. We're walking alongside them. We're not necessarily, holding their hands or stroking them and saying, they're there, it'll all be all right. But we are offering some support, aren't we?
Yeah.
So support and challenge.
Yeah. So challenge is good.
Yeah, I think so. I think we have to be careful. I think there are times when you can overstep that challenge. And I know when I look back at my long, glorious career, there have been times where I think, actually, that was too much for them. I've got that wrong. And I've had one lady who I challenged about her relationship with her boss, because she was seeing everything as her boss was evil and was making her life a misery. And I did offer her that challenge of, it sounds like she's adapting her style to meet your personality. So it sounds as if she's coming, but she didn't want to hear that. And there was a point where I said, what responsibility do you have as a senior leader in this organisation to manage that relationship successfully? And I think that was a challenge too far. I think she expected me to just agree with her and just say, no, you're right, this is awful, it's a terrible situation. And I don't think it was. I think it was how she was choosing to see it.
As is the case with many things. Yeah. It's often how we choose to see something in the story we tell ourselves.
But I think she became defensive, and I never saw her again. so
a challenge too far.
So a challenge too far, yeah. And actually, she sent me an email about 6 months later saying, I owe you an apology. I was in a bad place, and things are much better now. But there was some recognition, and that the relationship didn't end professionally. She just never came back. She just ghosted me.
So a challenge too far, but a challenge that probably was required.
Yeah, well, yeah, but again, is that helpful to get to a point where the coaching relationship breaks down and ends? That's perhaps not.
Perhaps not helpful.
I think I got it wrong. I think I just challenged too much too soon. I mean, that was, I think, third conversation in, so I didn't feel, and I'd coached her before as well, so I felt we had a really good rapport. But yeah, something didn't quite click on, and maybe it was just a bad day.
Maybe.
Know. So I think we have to be careful. That's the
Yeah.
point I'm trying to make, is that, you know, I'm quite capable of getting it wrong. I like to think that I learn as I go along, and I will have learned something from that interaction. But we have to just be mindful that we don't want to send people to a defensive place, but we do want them to think. And it's that generating new thinking that I'm really interested in. And for the most part, I think I do get it right. And I think people will go away and reflect and perhaps have conversations that they were adamant they weren't going to have because they were seeing the other person as evil. And I think, you know, big part of my work is about generating those conversations, making those conversations happen so that people have a better understanding of where the other person is coming from.
I think the world will generally be a better place if people communicated better and had new perspectives on other people's situations. So we've spoken about their story, we've spoken about generating new options. What other areas, what might we challenge a coachee in?
I think if they're not showing up for coaching when they come, I think that's a good place to challenge. So if they are just coming and having a chat and they're not really bringing topics to the room that require new thinking, and they've got some coaching booked and they haven't really given it a lot of thought before they come, they go, oh, I don't really know what I'm going to talk about. No, I think really if in that moment they stop to think about it, we might do some good work. But if they aren't really trying, I think that's a useful time to challenge and say, oh, well, we seem to have got to a place where the coaching's drifting now, so how can we bring it back on track? And you had some objectives at the beginning, so let's focus on that. What do you want to get out of the rest of our time together? I think that can be a really interesting challenge, because I think it's possible that people do. They get comfortable with you, it becomes that cosy club. They come and they have a nice chat and they go away and they go, oh, well, that's my coaching done, without really having to stop and think about, okay, there were objectives that I had for the coaching, and I'm not working towards those anymore. I've got someone at the moment that I've had that conversation where I've said, okay, so next time we meet, let's think about what we're going to try and achieve in that. And he recognised it. I mean, we did talk about some useful stuff. We'd done a psychometric, so we talked through that. But I knew before that session that it was starting to drift. So I made a conscious point of saying at the end of that session, okay, for the next session, let's think about what your objectives are for that. And, you know, for the next year, because hopefully we're going to carry on working together. He's got a big year coming up. And I think some of the reason for it drifting is he's a bit worried about next year and feeling a little bit exposed, so almost doesn't want to go there. So again, a defensive place of almost in denial of, okay, I need to do some work. He's sort of putting it off a bit. So I think just that gentle reminder, okay, you've come to coaching for a reason and we have some objectives. So next time, let's focus on those objectives and really make some headway in them. So they're not my objectives, but I want to do good work in the coaching and I want him to take something from it. I want him to have a successful career in whatever way that shows up for him. It's his definition of success, but he's come and he knows things are going on, and that's why he's come to coaching. So let's work on that stuff.
And what do you think about challenging someone around those objectives or goals that they set themselves? Is there a time for that?
Yeah, and I say I don't really have any attachment to their goals and their objectives. They're theirs, and sometimes they will change during the coaching. So quite often that's the case, that they'll start off saying, well, I want this, and as time goes on, they realise that actually that's not that important and it's something else they're looking for. But if they are definitely saying, well, I want this, then we check in with them.
And we spoke before when we were talking about positive psychology about gently challenging, if we are working with that positive psychology mindset and someone comes with a goal that will impact their well-being, impact how
yeah.
they've wanted to be, how they've said they want to be in life, how they want to show up. But attaining that goal is going to put pressure on their work-life balance, for example, or their health. So we've talked about that previously.
Yeah, so that ecology checking of, okay, this is your goal, but how does that impact on the rest of your life? And let's make sure it's the right goal. But if we're into it and they're working towards the goal and that starts to drift, then it might just be a checking back in and go, okay, well, let's make sure this was your goal, that we've got this right and you are still working towards the right goal. And if we are, what would it be good to happen coming up? What changes are you going to make to what you're doing? So I think, just keeping them on track. But I say, not for me. I'm not their boss, so I'm not going to be challenging in that way of saying, well, you said you'd do this and you haven't done it. What's going on? But we will let's just check in. Let's see where we are.
Back to that accountability piece that we talked about in a previous episode.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not your dad. It's up to you. If you want to do it, do it. But important to check in and say we're walking alongside them as they're doing it.
So we've talked a lot about gentle challenging, about raising awareness, finding new perspective. What advice would you give to someone who wants to be challenging about how they should be in that space?
Yeah, I think our intention in the coaching room, I'd say, it is to generate new thinking, but it's also to manage the relationship as well. So we don't want to end up being directive, because that's not coaching, that's mentoring. So I think that's quite easy, isn't it, if we feel like someone isn't showing up, to be directive about it.
Yeah,
so
why don't you do this?
Yeah. So that's easy to slip into. We don't want to be adversarial. That's not the relationship we have with our coachee. So we don't want to go there. And I've seen that happen. I had a coaching session where someone was, well, why have you chosen this? If it's only a 4, why are we talking about it? And I thought, no, actually, what? Dismissing what they brought to coaching as unimportant. And it wasn't. It was a 4 out of 10. But it was still important for the chap to talk about it. And but it was just the way this lady went about it was quite adversarial and just too challenging, I think, in my opinion. So we don't want to be aggressive or offensive. We don't want to lose control as a coach. We still want to be having a good coaching conversation. So retaining control. And we don't want to start working on our own personal agenda. So we want to keep that. It's their agenda. It's that for them to decide what they want to do. And just something came to mind then that I had some personal training some time ago from an ex-boxer, and he was ferocious. And there came a point where he was just pushing me too far, and I just stopped going because I thought this isn't. I wanted to do some boxing training, but I didn't want to be pushed to the point I was throwing up and that sort of thing. And so that's
not pleasant.
Yeah. So although I found a really good reason to leave the training. So he was talking. We were doing some stomach crunches or something, and he said, "Oh, this is good for you." Pelvic floor. He said, "This will help your uterus."
What?
And I thought, nah, you've lost me now. Come on, Mike. I don't have one of those. So that was a good reason to go, okay, you don't really know your stuff. I'm leaving. But if a bit of I'm honest, he was just working me too hard. So going back to coaching, I think, we don't want to lose them. So I think just back to that, walking alongside them, having really good coaching conversations and, challenging their thinking, but not being aggressive about it.
So you mentioned the cozy club. It's almost like that's one end of the spectrum where it's a friendly chat, and then the other end is that aggressive kind of personal trainer approach. And we want to be in the middle. We want them to trust us. We want to have rapport. We want them to open up, but we also don't want to be colluding with their story. So we want to challenge and move them forward. Excellent.
Lovely.
This has been fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Next time, what are we talking about on our next episode?
On our next episode, we're talking about a new approach to coaching. Well, a new approach.
Another
approach to coaching, which is transactional analysis, which
Excellent.
Is very deep. It's one of those you have to look after yourself whilst you're talking about all of that stuff, but we'll explore that next time.
And maybe put some cautions at the beginning.
Yes,
okay.
Warning. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much for our chat
you,
today
Helen.
around challenging.
It's been
Not
lovely.
quite as challenging as I thought it might be.
No.
Excellent. We'll see you next time. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.